All for One's Guide to a Peaceful Retirement, written by ScottishSunshine and read for you by Eleanor Elizabeth. Summary. When Inko gets sick, all she asks is that her husband take a step back from his work and focus on raising their son. And of course, All for One agrees, because he can afford to take it easy for a few decades. How hard can parenting Izuku be, after all? Chapter 1. Summary. All for One meets his son. Izuku Midoriya is perfect. All for One counts his fingers again, just to be sure. He isn't sure what he did to deserve this. Short answer, he doesn't deserve it. But he's a selfish, greedy man, and he soaks in every detail of his son. If All Might drags him to Tartarus tomorrow, it will be bearable, because he is able to spend his eternity living in a cell, reliving the best moment of his life. Hisashi, you can hand him back, his wife huffs, and All for One glances over to find her watching him with a faint smile on her face. That's good. It means he can hold Izuku a little longer, which is fantastic because he blinked. All for One, greatest villain to have ever lived, informs his wife with awe. Yes, Hisashi, babies tend to do that, Inko answers with a sigh. All for One doesn't pay her any mind. She's obviously still tired and over-emotional. She was in labour for hours after all and needs to rest. So as the wonderful, caring husband he is, he'll just hold Izuku for a little longer. Perhaps Izuku's quirk is already manifested. It's certainly possible, considering some are born with their quirks, although All for One isn't entirely sure how a perfection quirk would work. Perhaps Izuku's quirk is more along the lines of inspiring love in anyone who sees him. If so, it would most likely be one of those freak mutations that are so fascinating. All for One's fairly certain he never took any sort of love-inspiring quirk, and besides, he does not think Izuku would be able to inherit any of the quirks he wasn't born with. Whether the quirk is environmental, with a limited radius, or perhaps optical, it would have to be determined. Hisashi! Something thumps into his shoulder and he looks up with a frown, though Inko appears distinctly unimpressed. She simply huffs as she folds her arms. Was he muttering? He hopes he wasn't muttering. He trained himself to suppress that habit, but he's exhausted. He always knows he might slip up. He's not quite sure what he'd do then. He can wipe away Inko's memory, of course, but it seems so dishonest. He doesn't want to lie to his wife. Your phone's ringing, Inko informs him, and sure enough, she's right. He could have sworn he turned it off. I'll get it later, All for One shrugs, because it can't possibly be more important than this. After all, he's holding his son, who has freckles. All Might can attack his main base of operation for all he cares. Nothing is more important than this. Hisashi Midoriya, Inko growls, and All for One stiffens, because he knows that tone. He fears that tone. Give me back my son and answer your goddamn phone. All for One is the modern boogeyman. Whilst the public might not know about him, every law agency in the world whispers his name in fear. There is no one else that can send a shiver down the spine of All Might. But centuries of battles and planning and scheming have honed his instincts until they are razor sharp. He hands over Izuku and legs it from the delivery room. Apparently, Dr. Izuku does not understand the sentence, "Do not call me," All for One reflects as he sees the 5 missed calls. He's almost tempted to ignore them, but there's always the faint possibility that the authorities have noticed something strange about Hisashi Midoriya, so he bites back a sigh and hits the call button. He swears if All Might is responsible for this, he will level New York. Yes, Doctor, he prompts when his call is answered, though his thoughts are already occupied with more important matters. Will Izuku like the toy rabbit he picked out for him? All for One had never really planned to have children. He considered it for a time, much in the same way he considered killing the Prime Minister, but eventually rejected the idea. He had no intention of dying after all, and so he had no needs for a successor. A child would require far too much attention, effort, and time for an uncertain payoff. Inko had been unexpected. He had chosen to take a step back when All Might return to Japan. With enough time, the latest holder of One for All will undoubtedly lower his guard. But that could mean several years, or several decades, and dating seemed a decent enough way to pass some of that time. He never intended to fall in love with Inko, but would always be glad that he did. Having a home to return to is a strange, heady feeling. The apartment might be small, but Inko could turn even a tent into a warm, welcoming home, and so he made sure to construct the perfect fantasy for his wife, the hard-working office drone who may sometimes have to stay late but never forgets their anniversary, who sometimes bring home a bouquet of flowers just because, and takes her out to dinner, and sometimes calls her from work just to hear her voice. He almost has a panic attack when he returned from a business trip, and Inko presented him with 2 positive pregnancy tests. A baby was, and still is, a risk, especially a baby that might one day possess the ability to steal quirks. He might not be proud of it, but he considered inducing a miscarriage. But Inko was so happy to share the news and begin preparing for the new arrival. Her joy at becoming a mother far outshone her happiness at being married, and he could not do it. He could not take something so precious away from her, because even if he wiped her memory, even if she never remembered it, he would. And now, as he watched Izuku sleep, All For One is so achingly grateful for those last few morals, because Izuku is unpredictable and a risk and exhausting, and All For One has never been happier. He will always carry the guilt over what he considered doing deep in his soul, and he will always protect Izuku. Notes. This fic will involve some time skips between chapters, so starting in the next chapter, I'll list Izuku's age in the summary to avoid confusion. Chapters will be in chronological order. This whole fic comes from reading way too many DadForOne fics, and imagining All For One turning up to protect Izuku during the UA training camp raid, in a pink apron. Chapter 2. Invest in reliable transport. Summary. Kurogiri joins All For One and discovers his secret. Izuku is aged about 1 year. Kurogiri hesitates in front of the door. It's taken him months to get this far. Months of chasing rumours and petty crime to pay off the next information broker. Months of staying alert, always ready to warp away. He's lost count of the close calls, of the meals he's had to miss, of sleepless nights. But he's always trusted his instincts, and they've yet to steer him wrong. His instincts are currently screaming at him to leave and put as much distance between himself and the door as possible. But he's tired. He's leapt through so many hoops to get this far, and all to sell his soul to the devil, because, as ruthless and terrifying as this All For One might be, he's Kurogiri's best chance at safety. Although he can't help but wonder why someone as powerful as All For One wants to meet him in an abandoned school. He stamps down on his fear and doubts, mouths a silent prayer to whatever deity might be listening, and opens the door. The room is empty. As Kurogiri steps inside and looks around, he can feel the panic building. The room isn't anything special. It's barely more than a glorified utility closet with a few dusty shelves and a rusty bucket. There is no room for a secret passage, no hidden camera, not a single sign of life except for one lone dead spider, nothing to suggest that the feared All For One even knows this place exists. Kurogiri breaks. He collapses to his knees and sobs. He spent so long, already faced so many failures, and now not even his quirk, all that he has left, is enough. Rumours travel in the underground, especially about useful quirks, and All For One will surely have heard of Warpgate. If he has not contacted Kurogiri, if he has heard that Kurogiri is searching for him and has not shown up, then Kurogiri will never find him. He doesn't know when the tears dry up, but finally there is nothing left. No tears, no emotions, just emptiness. He has no idea what he'll do now, and he honestly doesn't have the energy to care. But instinct forces him up, because if All For One isn't here, then he's a sitting duck, and any of the dozen or so organisations ready to kill for Warpgate could already be on the way up the stairs. He turns, planning to barricade the door as best as he can so he can warp away, and then he sees it. It's nothing more than a small pink purse sitting innocuously on a shelf next to the door, but Kurogiri is positive that it wasn't there before. His hands tremble when he picks it up, but nothing happens, and he slowly unzips it. He almost drops it, because tucked inside is more money than he can ever recall seeing in his life. But there's a note too, and Kurogiri is no fool. He immediately pulls it out and unfolds it. Buy the items on this list, warp to these coordinates, and leave the items on the big rock. You will be watched. Kurogiri can do that. The coordinates are familiar enough. He regularly sleeps out in the countryside, and knowing such a powerful figure is testing him is strangely reassuring. He warps away, though he can't help but ponder over the shopping list. Why would a supervillain supposedly feared by All Might want 4 packs of baby diapers? It takes another month before Kurogiri meets All For One, and another 3 before the villain seems to have reached a final decision. Kurogiri understands the need for him to prove himself, and in a way, it just makes the moment sweeter, because he's leapt through every hoop, obeyed every command without question. All For One shouldn't be able to find fault with him. He does still feel fear as he kneels before the man, head bowed, of course. He'd be a fool not to. Should you ever betray me? All For One purrs, and allows the threat to just hang there. Kurogiri may not know the consequences, but he shudders. He can practically feel the malice. A phone rings. Kurogiri almost warps himself away out of sheer terror. He presses his head lower, apologies at the tip of his tongue. Then he realises he never brings his phone when he meets All For One. "He's what?" All For One exclaims, and Kurogiri can't help himself. He glances up at the man and almost has a heart attack when he meets his eyes. All For One hangs up and promptly shoves his phone in front of Kurogiri's face. A familiar location is displayed on the GPS app. "Take me there. Now." Kurogiri is no fool. He obeys. The area is nice and quiet, if unassuming, with small, perfectly pleasant houses. Kurogiri remembers visiting it a few times. Again, why did All For One require him to fetch 5 boxes of tissues and a box of chocolates at 23:47? He isn't sure what he should do, and All For One has already vanished into one of the homes, so he slowly follows, not wanting to have to explain his presence to some nosy housewife or homebound office worker. As he knocks on the door, he almost expects to see a reenactment of Harry Potter, specifically Voldemort's visit to the Potters, but the woman that answers the door looks nice, and not at all afraid, and very much not dead, and Kurogiri has the wrong house. Doesn't he? He has to. There's no other possible explanation. "Are you all right?" the woman asks, wide-eyed as he starts to hyperventilate, and Kurogiri manages a slightly hysterical laugh. Kurogiri doesn't register when she bustles him inside, doesn't notice when she sits him down on the sofa. He isn't sure how long he stays there, numb to the world. Finally, he calms down enough to realise he's holding a lukewarm cup of tea. Once again, his curiosity gets the better of him, and so he glances around the room. It looks so domestic. There are family photos on the wall, and baby toys scattered all over the floor. Even All For One doesn't look out of place standing behind the woman, holding a baby. Kurogiri is going to die, isn't he? Chapter 3. Remember what truly matters. Summary. The Midori's get some devastating news, and Inko gives her husband an ultimatum. Izuku, aged 1.5 to 3. Chapter spans several months. All For One has lived for decades. He has gone by countless names and faced down more threats than he cares to count. There have been expected showdowns with One For All wielders and other heroes, but every few decades he is also forced to smack down some criminal upstart. Although most of the time the confrontations are laughable, there have been more close calls than he would like to admit. But he has never felt dread like this before, reaching in and curling its icy tendrils around his heart, and it's so odd that it should be here, in a pleasant, sunny room sitting next to his wife. The doctor opposite them continues to drone on about treatment plans and likely prognosis, but All For One cannot seem to focus on his words. A single sentence keeps ringing in his ears. He makes sure to appear calm, because Inko is already clutching a box of tissues, tears rolling down her face, and it breaks his heart just a little more. But everything will be all right. He comforts himself because there is a quirk out there that can make this better. There has to be. He can't let Inko die. "Hisashi? All For One hums, focused on his tablet. He doesn't think any of these quirks would work, as they wouldn't be able to distinguish between the healthy and cancerous cells. But Japan is small. "Hisashi!" He's locked his tablet and snapped to attention before his name has even registered, and how All Might would laugh if he could see him now, the picture of a well-trained husband. He guesses from the slight twitch of Inko's lips that she's guessed some of his thoughts. Or perhaps he started muttering. He can't remember when he last slept through the night. He can't remember the last time he did many things, he realises guiltily, as he hears Izuku's laughter coming from the living room. "Hisashi," Inko repeats, breaking him out of his musings. "We need to talk." "About what?" he says, trying to recall if he's done anything that might have upset her. He's been keeping up with the house chores, although he did wipe out that Yakuza group last week. But if Kurogiri kept his mouth shut, Inko doesn't answer immediately, and that is enough to make him worry. Are her symptoms acting up? Is caring for Izuku too tiring in her present state? Perhaps he should have been more insistent about hiring a nanny. "If I die," she finally starts, and All For One's brain screeches to a halt. "You're not going to die," he blurts out. "Because she can't. He won't allow it. He'll find a way. He has to. I don't want to." Inko interrupts his thoughts, and it pains him to see her wiping her eyes. "But, Hisashi, you heard the doctor." "Yes, but, Hisashi." All For One snaps his mouth shut. He's no fool, and that tone strikes more fear into his heart than any holder of One For All ever could. Inko's eyes are still glistening, but there is a determined set to her shoulders, and All For One knows that expression. Whatever it is she wants, he won't be able to fight it. Thank God she's not a hero. If I die, Inko repeats, and All for One has to press his lips together so not to protest. I need to know that Izuku will be alright, and happy, and he'll need his father. So I want you to promise me you'll retire. What? I want you to stop. Whatever the hell it is you do, Inko groans. I don't know what it is, but I know it's... She waves her hands, lost for words. And I know it's only a matter of time before some hero comes along and gets lucky, or you make a mistake. Inko takes a deep breath. And I'm sorry, but I can't risk that happening when Izuku will be caught in the crossfire. So I'm giving you a choice. Either find some way to leave, or so help me, I will take Izuku and I'll do everything to ensure you will never see me again. She's crying openly now, and he's fairly sure he has tears in his own eyes, but she's right, isn't she? If she's gone and All Might gets lucky, then Izuku, dear darling Izuku, would be all alone. And 15, 20 years isn't all that long when you're as powerful as he is. If he waits, All Might could become careless. And he doesn't know what he would do if he ever lost both Inko and Izuku at the same time. Probably level Tokyo, however cliché it might sound. So he ignores his own tears and reaches out to pull Inko into as tight a hug as he dares. I'll try, he chokes out, and he feels Inko's own tears start soaking his shirt. I don't know if I'll succeed, but I'll try, for you and Izuku. Inko laughs. It's wet and broken, but he'll take what he can get. You're such a softie. I guess I am, All for One murmurs in response. It takes him several months, countless bodies and a natural disaster in Russia, but finally Midoriya Hisashi is ready to take the place of All for One. And so he steps through Kurogiri's warp gate late one night, the faint smell of smoke still clinging to his clothing, and smiles at Inko, who is sitting propped up in her hospice bed. It's done, he informs her, and sits down by her bedside and takes her hand in his. All for One is retired. Inko giggles, and he feels a smile tug at his lips. At some point, don't think about it, don't remember that day, never remember that day, he told her, because she had a point when she said no one would question a dying woman, however much he hates that thought, and if anyone deserves to know, it's her. And if he happens to gloss over the exact number of victims, well, she's not a mind reader. Hisashi, Inko whispers. They don't need to look over at Kurogiri to know he's very pointedly not listening and completely engrossed in one of Inko's craft magazines. Yes, my love, All for One murmurs and presses his lips to her hand, and Inko giggles again. Then, though, she grows serious again. Hisashi, I want you to take my quirk. And just like that, he doesn't know what to say. Admittedly, that is part of what he loves about Inko, but it can get rather tiring. I've been reading up on quirkless genetics, Inko admits. And you're a first-generation quirk user, so there's every possibility that Izuku could be quirkless. But you can easily pass off my quirk as his, so... All for One blinks back his own tears as Inko dabs at her own eyes. What should I do if he has a quirk? I'd still like you to give it to him, she admits and smiles. I know I won't be there as he's growing up, but if he has my quirk, he'll always have some part of me with him. It makes sense. It makes so much sense that he doesn't know why he didn't think of it himself. He knows it's because it would mean accepting the inevitable, and he just can't. So, with Inko's firm gaze on him, he takes it. It's like her, small, unassuming, but so warm, so full of hidden strength. He can't help the tears as he tucks it away, promising himself that he will wait until Izuku can appreciate it before he hands it over. He won't admit it, but right now, he needs this, to keep some part of her close. Now, I think you should get back to Izuku, Inko tells him as she dabs at her eyes. Remember what happened last time you let Gigantomachia babysit overnight?